we're going to move into the pre-production session straight away, and hopefully we can have a break at the end of that. There will be in your screen the opportunity now to poll through the Mentimeter. And I'd like to direct you to that. Again, it's very simple. Just put the website on your, you can see at the top of the screen here, go to www.menti.com and use that code 650929 to simply vote on that selection of options, please. We'll share this information, the results of this at the end of the workshop. Very good. Now, coming up, we're moving along the value chain, and we're going to kick off with the first session that focuses on the pre-production stage. And in this case, we're going to hone in on the GAIN project's focus on sustainable feeds. We have an interesting panel for you. I'd like to introduce Richard Newton from Sterling, who's been on the GAIN project and is going to give us an overview. And that will then be followed by three panelists. Lindsay Pollock, who's from Cargill, will give us an industry perspective on sustainable sourcing of feeds. She'll be followed by Dan Lee of IGAA or BAP, who will think of the issues around novel feed ingredients. Just how sustainable are they? We hear a lot about them. Before finally moving to Matt Sprague, who's at the Nutrition Analytical Service at the University of Stirling, who will think about how we move to sustainable diets for fish, aqua diets. What impacts might that have on fish health, welfare, and consumer? And they'll address those comments orally in a short form. So firstly, I'd like to hand over to Richard. Please vote on the Mentimeter, and we'd love to hear your opinions of those questions. Thank you. Over to you, Richard.
Thanks, Dave. Morning, everybody. While I share my screen, I introduce myself. So I'm Richard Newton from Institute of Aquaculture, and I've been working on the GAIN project for 3 years, particularly looking at how to measure sustainability using life cycle assessment and other indicators. Also working particularly with value chain analysis to identify bottlenecks and drivers within the market for increasing sustainability of aquaculture. So this session is about pre-production, and particularly when we're talking about pre-production in the GAIN project and also some of the other projects I understand, we're particularly looking at feed and how sustainable is feed and sourcing of feed ingredients. So why are we looking particularly at feed? Well, in most fed aquaculture systems, we see that feed contributes to over 95% of the carbon, water, and land footprints and some of the other environmental impacts, global environmental impacts within global aquaculture value chains. Therefore, it's imperative to be efficient with the use of feed. And that means reducing FCRs through whichever means that may be, whether it's through precision aquaculture, it means reducing disease, increasing the performance of the fish at the farm. Also, it means that we need to be better at procuring feed ingredients from sustainable and responsible sources, wherever they may be. And as we've moved forward and as aquaculture has grown, been a huge success story over the last couple of decades, we've seen an ever-increasing pool of ingredients that's hit the market, such as insect-based feeds. We've seen single cell proteins, agricultural proteins and oils. We've seen also an increased use of processed animal proteins and fishery byproduct proteins and oils hitting the market. But the policies and the sustainability credentials of these new ingredients, and indeed some of the traditional ingredients, are not always clear. So part of what we were trying to do within the GAIN project was to introduce this EC and be able to measure the sustainability of these ingredients more clearly. Also look at the policies which underpin their utilization and driving them onto the market. So historically, there's been a reliance on finite resources of marine ingredients. We've seen that aquaculture has grown a lot over the last few decades, but simultaneously the supply of the traditional sources of marine ingredients has been dropping over the same time. These traditional fisheries that we've been used to source our marine ingredients from. This has led to increased prices for these marine ingredients and incentives to replace those ingredients with other ingredients, which are we've been talking about, vegetable ingredients, particularly things like soy. And this has had implications for the sustainability, many trade-offs in terms of sustainability credentials. It has implications for the welfare of the fish, and it also has implications for product quality of the products hitting the market that consumers can buy. This is one of the outputs of the GAIN project. It's a sustainability assessment showing some of the indicators for a typical Norwegian salmon feed. And you can see within that there's a huge amount of trade-offs between the different impacts which you see between the different ingredients which make up the feed. So particularly you see obviously high fish in, fish out ratio associated with the marine ingredients, high biotic resource use from the marine ingredients. But the flip side of that is that as we replace those marine ingredients, there's a higher contribution to global warming potential from vegetable ingredients. You see higher land use, higher water use. So there's a huge amount of trade-offs between this, and this is just the environmental indicators. As we look into the economic indicators and social indicators, there's also a huge amount of trade-offs there too. So there's a lot of considerations that we need to think of when we are moving away from marine ingredients and sourcing other ingredients to replace them. Particularly, we have to think about being strategic with the limited supplies that we have in terms of marine ingredients, particularly. Are we using them for the right species at the right stages? Are we adopting circular economy principles so that we can increase the pool of marine ingredients from byproduct resources, for example, making use of the whole fish that we process? Are the replacements for the marine ingredients as sustainable as they claim to be? Are they independently assessed using established and agreed methodology for measuring their sustainability? Do they involve redirecting resources from somewhere else to grow these ingredients? For example, are they relying on substrates or feedstocks which could be better used for other livestock or for feeding humans, for example? Are they scalable? Can they be produced in consistent quality and quantities? Are they affordable? Do they match up to the prices we expect for replacement of marine ingredients? Do they have the same impact in terms of performance? The nutrition goals aligned with the long-term trends in terms of production as we as aquaculture changes and the way we produce fish in net pens or land-based systems, recirculating systems, more extreme sites. Are these feeds suitable for the fish which will be grown in those systems? Do they add to disease resistance? Do they have nutritional profiles which will aid their performance and also give the quality that we expect in the final product? Finally, are the policy and market objectives aligned with consumer perceptions and industrial perceptions? Does the policy that we have within the EU at the moment, is it facilitating sustainability of aquaculture? And is it in agreement with the industry experience and market trajectories that we are witnessing? Are these markets being skewed by consumer demands? And by that I mean as a vociferous minority of consumers which are pushing the sustainability agenda, which doesn't necessarily reflect what we see amongst the wider public. So are the companies misinterpreting consumer perceptions in terms of what consumers want and how sustainability agenda should be driven? So that's a kind of brief introduction from me over the considerations that we need to think about in terms of sustainable ingredient sourcing. And I'll hand over to our panelists to answer some questions and give you some industry insight on these considerations.
Thank you, Richard. Before we hand over to our panelists, I just wonder if we could share the results of the first polling that have come in from the participants, from you guys in the audience. That should be coming up now, which sort of demonstrates sort of thoughts around the sustainable feed sourcing space. Okay, so looking forward to what extent should marine ingredients in aquaculture be replaced? You can see some of those, or only partly seems to be the dominant thoughts there. Some people say entirely, but very few. So there's a degree of caution to the level to which they can be replaced. And okay, the Wordle sort of giving us just how people are valuing the idea of local feed ingredients, perhaps part of the circular economy, and an emphasis there on low trophic systems. Thanks very much. Let's move on to our panelists, who I'm really pleased they've stepped up to the mark here. Lindsay, could you kick off with this industry perspective, please? Thank you.
I can't start my video because I think the host has to start that for me. I don't know if that's
someone can
possible.
do that. You just
okay.
Give us a minute.
Right, I'm winning. Thank you. I'll put myself on a timer. Good morning. I'm Lindsay Pollock from Cargill Aqua Nutrition in the North Sea. And as Dave introduced me, I'm here to offer some perspectives from a feed company's point of view on what sustainable ingredient sourcing looks like for us. So at Cargill, we're a globally integrated food company, and we're very focused on meeting consumer needs. But we want to provide feed solutions, therefore, to grow the fish that people want to eat. So you'll all be familiar with the sector growth in aquaculture over the last 20 years. We need to produce more feed, but that has to be from sustainable feed ingredients. Traditionally, there's been such a lot of focus on marine ingredients as a sector, and we've actually been very successful in finding alternative vegetable replacement for marine ingredients in salmon feeds particularly. So there's been roughly around a 4-fold increase in global salmon production over that time, and we've been able to achieve 80% reduction in the marine ingredient inclusions in feeds. We've increased the amount of certified marine ingredients we're using, and we've also been engaged in fisheries improvement programs to bring others along that journey to sustainable marine ingredient production. And we've increasingly been using byproducts in marine ingredients as well. But over the years, we've learned that focusing on a single raw material group or single issues isn't the best strategy. And we have to have a wide basket of sustainable raw materials to choose from. And that facilitates flexibility and resilience for us as feed manufacturers. But we want all those ingredients to be responsibly sourced and to prove that and select freely from those to meet the needs that we have for our customers. But that means working across multiple issues now, both related to issues around about marine ingredient sourcing, but also plant ingredient sourcing, touching on some of these issues Richard talked about, such as land use change. But we also have to look at identifying, of course, the next new ingredients that are going to come downstream for us, and whether we can use them in aquafeeds and evaluate their potential, each on their own merits. So all of these ingredients have to come together and compete for space in the pellet, both on sustainability and nutritional value, but also on cost. We're working in a complex value chain. And of course, collaboration with stakeholders is important for us to help create the solutions to the industry challenges. So we do a lot of work on stakeholder engagement with different groups like Marine Trust, MSC, Sustainable Fisheries Partnership on the reduction fishery side, and NAPA looking at the blue whiting issue in the North Atlantic. But we also work pre-competitively on issues like soy sourcing, for example, through the Aquaculture Dialogue on Sustainable Soy Sourcing in Brazil. So for us today, feed sustainability means taking a very holistic and collaborative approach to sustainability management. And we have to look at the ingredients themselves and their influence on environmental footprint of the fish that we're growing. And that means dealing with a new set of metrics now, not just the fish in, fish out that we've traditionally looked at, but looking now at LCA and carbon footprint in particular. So that's a focus for us in our See Further sustainability programme. And there's still much to be done, but I believe, as a value chain, we can work to improve the sustainability of aquaculture and really tell that story together. That's all from me, and I'll pass over now to Dan, I believe.
Thank you very much. Okay, a chance just to chime in here about market perceptions and what our role is within Global Aquaculture Alliance. We tend to sit between the marketplace and the producers and help to interpret the marketplace demands and expectations. So we have some useful insights on how this is shaping up, and the whole question of sustainability and how we particularly look at novel ingredients. So these retailers, they're always trying to interpret what they think the consumer wants, trying to anticipate consumer requirements. Sometimes they're overcautious, sometimes they get it wrong. Sometimes they're with the science, sometimes they're less coherent. But you do get major drivers such as Walmart in the US making commitments on greenhouse gases. They want to go net zero by 2040 within their own operations. And they're also pushing that message down all their supply chains. So people supplying products to their stores are going to have to account for impacts. And this carries through to aquaculture products, and also that way to the feeds, because as Richard pointed out, 95% of the impact of an aquaculture product is typically bound up in its feed and the ingredients going into that feed. So if we're going to compare like with like and compare proteins, livestock with aquaculture products and fishery products, we need standardized approaches such as PEF, and we're going to need some life cycle analyses on these novel products, the algae oils, the single cell proteins, the GM oil seeds, insect meals, byproduct meals. They need to be done in a consistent way across the range, so that we can make some valid comparisons. A few recent examples I'd like to touch on about how these discussions evolve. With GM feed ingredients, that's always been very sensitive in Europe, partly because of BSE and the long shadow of that tragedy. In the USA, they're less impacted by BSE, and the FDA is more trusted. So GM there's less opposition to GM feed ingredients in the US. And within supply chains for aquaculture products, for shrimp, it's very hard to get GM-free feeds for shrimp. So the UK retailers, for example, have come around to the idea that it's not feasible to block shrimp on that basis. There's the subject of refeeding of animal proteins. This was always a big concern, also driven by the BSE issue. And at one stage we blocked that entirely, but then we through our standards, we now allow hydrolysates, for example, shrimp hydrolysates, as long as there's nothing remaining there greater than, less than, everything has to be below 10,000 Daltons in size. And we also allow trout oil to be fed to trout, as long as it's properly filtered and there's no proteins. I'm coming up against my time limit, so I won't give you any more examples, but just to the illustrations there about how we have to deal with these different points and try and interpret what the market wants and transfer it into standards and then onto producers. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Dan. Over to you, Matt.
Thanks, Dave. So we all know that fish are a valuable source of rich nutrients, important for human health, development, etc. So things such as fatty acids, iodine, selenium, etc. So one of the first things when you are using alternative ingredients in the fish feed is the actual impacts on the compositional changes of the fish quality itself. So things such as using replacement fish oil with vegetable oils, we know things such as the fatty acid composition will change. We've obviously seen things such as the EPA DHA content, long chain omega-3 fatty acids, important for human health, heart, immunological responses, etc. We have seen these decline dramatically over the years and having levels. Similarly, what we're also seeing is things like iodine, selenium, all of these which are important to human health and development. Now, these minerals and micronutrients are also important for the fish themselves. And whilst we can replace and we get good growth, we generally do have the feed meeting the nutritional requirements of the fish. So there's really not too many issues there. But it's then also meeting, it's lowering the effect of what's happening for the human consumer, which means we actually have to eat more to reach the recommended nutrient intakes from government organizations to say for optimum health in humans. So replacing, for example, vegetable oils in fish feeds, we tend to see an imbalance of omega-3 to omega-6 fatty acids. Now, omega-6 fatty acids are more pro-inflammatory. So if we look at the human health, for example, optimum ratio would probably be around about 5 omega-6 to 1 part omega-3. Western diet is probably about 20 to 1 ratio. So there's also obviously the implications on what's happening with the fish themselves by feeding this. And we've seen effects such as when they're fed vegetable oils, they don't don't respond well to sort of challenges. So their stress response isn't quite as well as if they were fed a fish oil rich diet, for example. The use of other alternative ingredients such as algal biomass can cause increased enteritis. That's probably due to higher ash content. So a biomass is much more difficult than the oil, certainly when replacing the ingredients, because it's sort of a hybrid, where you've got the whole component rather than just an oil source. You're replacing like for like. There's other parts in there as well. So we see like this increased ash content is having an effect on sort of fish health and sort of welfare. However, when we're replacing these ingredients, it's probably important to put it into perspective and try and do the comparisons between sort of like for like. So if we look at things such as iodine and EPA DHA levels in farm salmon at the moment, yes, they have decreased over the years, but if we compare it to actually a wild Atlantic salmon, they're currently around about the same levels. It is obviously a concern that they keep decreasing, but at the moment we're sort of on around about the same levels. And it's also the same for other species such as sea bass, turbot, halibut, etc. So yes, it's one thing where we not only have to look at the implications only on the nutritional quality of the fish, but it's also on how they react in terms of their health and welfare. And obviously at the end point, it's the consumer that's ultimately going to be benefiting from these nutrients. I think that would do me for now.
Thank you, Matt. Thanks to all the panelists and to Richard. And now we have an open session really for Q&A, and there's some Q&A coming up on the screen. I'm not sure if everyone can see that, but let's go with the first one. Given apparent overproduction, is there an opportunity to use mussel meal as a feed ingredient? This would be a low carbon, low trophic level and be a product that improves environmental quality. Also typically high in micronutrients already, but will the costs work? That's a question to the panelists. Perhaps I could ask Lindsay what she thinks of that from a perspective of cargo.
Yeah, I mean, I think we always have to look at each of these new novel ingredients in their own, on their own merits. And I think one of the challenges with these type of things can be about scale and availability and the processing that's required to get these into a usable form that can make its way in terms of the space and nutrient value in the formulation. So these things are of interest, and we have to look at all options really, but amongst those we have to pick candidates that are the most likely to succeed in terms of their nutritional composition and contribution to the formulations, as well as the cost and sustainability.
Yeah, whether these ingredients can, as you say, compete for that place in the pellet, which I thought was an evocative image there. These novel feed ingredients fighting to get into a pellet.
Dave,
yes.
Sorry, just on that, could I say that mussels used to be incorporated, spring spawn mussels from Ireland used to be incorporated in fripac diets for shrimp larvae. So it's already known as a high quality ingredient. I think you'd probably have to justify the expense of it. You'd have to go for some target little niche like that, some larval diet or some hatchery diet.
And what do you think, Dan, the retailers would make of that? Feeding mussels to salmon or some other high trophic carnivore.
It just clashes with my sensibilities. We should be eating the mussels directly. That there's an overproduction is worrying. Goodness me, we should be eating those mussels. And we should market them better and get the supermarkets on board at that level rather than sell the idea of feeding mussels to salmon.
Okay, thanks for that perspective. Another question from Katie Michalak. If we look at all the alternative feeds, the insect-based feeds, microalgal-based feeds, etc., which ones do you consider the most promising regarding a sustainable transition? Richard, could you perhaps comment on that? Have we lost Richard?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, if we're looking at all the range, the basket of alternative feed ingredients, so the insect-based ones, the algal-based ones, etc., which ones do you consider that have the most promise and why?
That's a tough question. I think they're all different and they all have different contexts. The insects have shown a lot of promise in recent years, that they tick a lot of boxes in terms of circular economy. But I think if anyone knows the space that's in Europe with insects at the moment, that they're considered to be farmed animals as well. So if they're a farmed animal, then you have to feed them feed grade substrates. So it's the same sort of thing as Dan was touching upon. We shouldn't be feeding insects with feed grade substrates. They should be used directly as feed for animals that we can eat directly. So I think there needs to be a lot of changes in the policy regarding how we treat insects. Some of the others, I think, so the algal oils and algal biomass, they show a lot of promise, but I think also there's some environmental bottlenecks that might need to be addressed with those as well. They typically need a lot of energy to reduce them to a dry biomass. They're quite wet substrates, and they're quite energy intensive, a lot of them. So they're new kids on the block, and I guess that they will all improve in terms of their sustainability credentials and also in terms of the policies which are underpinning them and driving them forwards. Okay,
thanks for that. There's a whole range of constraints. Sorry, Dan?
Yeah, I think the question was for one. If I had to pick one, I'd just go for the GM oil seeds as long as they're sustainably farmed.
Again, big sort of governance issues around those at the moment, and it seems that all of these novel feed ingredients have a weakness or a problem, in a sense, to them becoming mainstream ingredients, whether it's the circular economy, that the regulations, European regulations, don't allow waste to be reused, or there's something there. And this is why I think the three projects and their overlaps around circular economy is really quite interesting. We have a question here from Luis Conceição. shall policy regulation impose stronger demands on aquafeeds quality to improve fish welfare at the expense of higher feeds and market fish prices? In other words, these trade-offs, will the market, will the consumer accept higher prices for these greener, more sustainable feed ingredients? Who would like to have a pop at that? Perhaps Lindsay?
I'll have a go at that one. I think it's that's really hitting the nail on the head. It's whether there are a number of possibilities out there in terms of the ingredients that we use, formulations that we can make for feeds. We prioritize completely fish health and welfare, and that's one of the biggest drivers to the environmental footprint of salmon farming, is making sure that more of your fish thrive when they're at sea and are healthy. I think in terms of particularly about novel ingredients and trying to pull those through, there needs to be a real downstream pull. But of course, it comes at a cost. These things are more expensive to formulate into feeds. At the moment, as a value chain, if we want to include them, we have to, figure out where that cost can be, pulled through. So I think it's an important one, of understanding, what that can do to the cost of the salmon, and then what that means when a consumer comes along to buy that fish on a supermarket shelf, whether they're willing to pay a premium for that fish in particular.
Yes, the thorny issue of willingness to pay. What does it really mean? We may go into that supermarket with the best intentions, but then see that sticker with a cheaper price, and we're all prone to that, aren't we? There's a question here for Richard around your chart in your presentation of declining fishmeal and fish oil. Did that include byproducts? Is the question.
No, that wasn't a chart of fishmeal and fish oil. That was a chart of the species, the fisheries volumes for those species. So no, it doesn't include byproducts. The estimate now is that about 30 to 40% of the global supply of fishmeal and fish oil is made up from byproduct resources. So as the fisheries resources have declined, then a lot of that slack has been made up from the byproduct resources, right? And I think there's a lot of potential to increase it more. If people are aware of my work, a lot of it's been centered around improving the utilization of byproducts from fisheries and aquaculture, adding value to those byproducts wherever possible. And a lot of that is in terms of adding to the pool of marine ingredients which are available for utilization for aqua feeds or for other livestock feeds. And yeah, we need to do better with that, and perhaps we should be turning to those what considers to be waste resources or underutilized resources first, before we consider some of the other novel ingredients which may be more difficult to get to market in terms of scalability and costs and things like that. There's a huge amount of wasted byproduct, both from seafood production and from terrestrial food production.
Yeah, that's all good points, Richard. I mean, I think there'll of course be a lobby, there'll be a body of opinion that says, we just should be catching a lot less fish. The Ocean Health Group, for example, would be saying that, and these are trade-offs the industry has to work through. By the way, just to be clear, the whole presentations, the whole session will be uploaded to YouTube in short sections around each session in the coming days. So watch out for that. For many of you, I hope it's a useful reference. We have a few minutes, and I'd just like to ask Matt, you make the very good point about declining omega-3 levels in farmed salmon, and yet this is still a very good source. But also, you've also mentioned the fact that salmon is a really important source of other micronutrients. Do you think there's an overemphasis on omega-3 in aquaculture farm products, and that actually what we should be doing is emphasizing this is many farmed aquatic foods are essentially superfoods. They're full of different micronutrients. Should we be looking at that rather than this focus on omega-3?
Well, I mean, seafood in general is a whole nutritional package, but it depends which nutrients you're looking at, because it really depends on the different species. So if we're talking, for example, iodine, then we know white fish to be much higher than fatty fish. Vitamin D generally tends to be higher in fatty fish and EPA. So, you know, that's why we got this balanced sort of recommendations from the government to eat at least two portions of fish per week, of which one of those should be oily, and then the other one white fish. So you know, we've got all these different reference nutrient intakes for different micronutrients, be it selenium, iodine, EPA, DHA to some extent. So yeah, I mean, it is kind of following those advisory guidelines, but in my personal opinion, we do need to eat more seafood, and that should also include, you know, when we talk about the guidelines, it often just generally focuses on fish, you know, but we should be talking about seafood in terms of shellfish, crustaceans, etc. You know, because they as Anton sort of pointed out earlier on, they do contain high amounts of micronutrients important for human health. The other point I just want to make, we're not talking about a decline of the marine ingredients. We're more or less talking about the increased shortfall. So, you know, because the marine ingredients have basically been static for a long time. It's just that obviously increased productions occurred over this time, and to actually feed all these fish, we don't have enough of these marine ingredients, so we need to find the shortfall. So we're basically augmenting the marine ingredients that are currently available. So in long-term focus was, you know, it is going to be, we need this sort of toolbox of all these different ingredients out there, be it GM, algal oils, etc. You know, just to complement the existing sources of marine ingredients, whether we blend them as we do currently with fish oil and vegetable oils, or if it's just a sole use, if you're using completely algal oil, for example. I mean, obviously at the moment the costs are expensive for the algal oil, but as production increases and demand increases, we'll probably see those prices drop even further, so they may become a bit more competitive in future years.
Thanks. Just to finish, there's a note, another comment that, in fact, Norwegian farmers are trying out mussel meat because of the problems associated with producing commercially valuable mussels in that part of the world. So there's a potential interest there, and indeed people moving in that direction. We're just going to go for a 5-minute break, and we're going to share the screen briefly to show you the polling results of those questions earlier. I'll just hand over. You should see a change in the screen. We're going to be back at 9:35 UK time, 10:35 Central European time for the next session. So please don't be late, but take a couple of minutes to have a break just now. This screen's up. Yes, much of the same ideas. More than 60% see marine ingredients can only partially be replaced. Thank you for that. We'll be doing a series of these through the workshop. Yes, much the same in terms of the first hit. So what are we doing about local feed ingredients? How can we do more of that rather than sourcing feed ingredients from around the world, perhaps? Yeah, circularity. How can we use waste and byproducts? And yeah, a focus on low trophic species. Okay, I'll close this session now, and I'll see you back in a few minutes' time. Thank you.